Well, I'm working in the front yard today, and by the way, I wrote a newsletter this morning where I talked about reframing how I look at things. And so I'm saying I don't have to work in the garden today, I get to work in the garden today, which makes it seem far more pleasant, and especially on a cool, cloudy morning like this. So I've got all sorts of things I need to do in the front garden that I've been putting off because I've been involved in other things. Oh, and by the way, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, it's free. There's a link below. You can just click on it and it will ask you to put in your email address and it will just magically appear in your inbox. Okay, so I've already showed, depending on the sequence Stuart and I published these, talking about Euonymus, which is a very common plant that I like to use maybe in uncommon ways. And this is about as common as you get. This is a Manhattan Euonymus. You often see it as an evergreen hedge. It is a pretty tough, easy plant to grow, though it can be susceptible to pests, and I talked about that in another video. Right now, I don't recall planting this. It just appeared years ago, and now it does sporadically try to scale this massive oak tree. Stuart, can you get close enough just so people can see how the expanse of this oak tree? This is a Shumarty oak, and it is probably one of the oldest trees in the neighborhood. And you can see that I've got ivy growing on it, but that I only let the ivy grow to a certain height. You can see where it's been cut off, so it doesn't get up there and do any damage to the tree itself. But I do like the look of it climbing to a certain height, but then I wrangle it down. So I'm also wrangling today this Manhattan Euonymus, which can kind of grow because it has a vertical growth pattern, so it's not attached to the tree like this English ivy, but it does kind of lean against the tree and look as if it does. So this, we just had a pretty big storm, and you can see all of this separated from the tree, and today I'm just doing some big tidy up. So all I'm gonna do is just cut back. And by the way, some of you ask, here's answering a frequently asked question, what do I do with all of my clippings once I make a big pile of them? Now, a lot of times, if it's small things that are appropriate for the compost pile, I just put them in the compost pile. But obviously, I have a whole lot of stuff, and these pieces are really too big, and some of them may have pests on them, so they just won't break down. Sadly, I have to put them in my trash can. Now, do I wish we had municipal composting or someplace where I could take this stuff, where they do composting on a grand scale? Absolutely. And a number of years ago, I even met with the mayor's wife and the mayor himself to talk about municipal composting. Sadly, it was not a priority and it didn't go anywhere, and perhaps I was not tenacious enough because I didn't continue to follow up on it. But if you are a community-minded kind of person, then I would highly suggest that as something, as a cause to get behind. Now this is going to look ugly initially as I cut this back pretty dramatically, and you may ask, will I kill it being so aggressive? No, no way I kill it. And honestly, even if I did, there is so much else going on here that it wouldn't break my heart if it did. Now there are some really thick branches and trunks to this. that if I wanted to cut it down much lower or even all the way to the base, I would get out my big loppers to do that. In this case, I'm just using some regular pruners, and if I think of it, I'll put some links below to some that I use, because obviously I have multiple pairs of pruners. I usually just use whatever I can find, and that's good and sharp. If I see anything else that's kind of wayward, like some of it here is starting to grow up in the Nandina. This is what it looks like when it's in more of a ground cover form. And as I think back, here's a little historical tidbit. When we first designed this, we tried to grow Vinca minor as a ground cover. And I think that in the flat that we planted, this was probably planted because it kind of looks like Vinca minor on steroids. And I bet that's how it got established. So whenever you're introducing new plants, make sure that you're actually planting what you're hoping to plant. And back then, this flower bed was made probably, gosh, 29 years ago, 30 years ago. I may not have known the difference between those plants then, because I've said over and over again, I'm a self-taught gardener, and I learned over time. And how did I learn? By doing, by observing, by copying, by listening to garden mentors, and reading lots of books, which takes me to, Stuart, would you remind me that so many people have asked me to share some of my favorite gardening books and who some of my most influential gardeners, garden designers have been in the formation of my look and my aesthetic and my gardening practices. So, Stuart, we need to do a video on that. Put in the comments below if that's something that you're interested in, because I'll be happy to share. And as an aside, I am going to be putting a bunch of stuff, including redundant gardening books and things like that that I've got too many of. I'm trying to cull down my garden library, and I'm going to be putting a lot of those, I think, up on Facebook Market or something like that to sell. So I'm making some progress. So this is what I was talking about. If I want to get this down lower, look at how thick that trunk is. I'm going to have to get more powerful, bigger guns to wrangle that into submission. If you're in a bad mood, if you're mad at your photographer or your hubs or your kids or the pandemic or life, this is a wonderful thing to do. It is far more productive than kicking the dog. Okay. Are you still with me, Stuart? Okay. Stuart, you guys, is really not much of a gardener, though he is an urban and vegetable gardener. But he is learning probably more than he wants to know about gardening now. And about being a good sport. So you can see here my pile is getting pretty big. I'm going to have to go and get my big loppers. And my trash can to get rid of all this debris, and I will do that toot sweet. Now, I started talking at the beginning about a newsletter and how I like to kind of reframe things. I love ideas like that make me look at life in different ways, in a way that makes things seem a little bit more pleasant and makes life seem easier. Well, here is another thing that I learned. I'm a big fan of the Gretchen Rubin podcast, and she sometimes uses what she calls the concept of an incomplete download. And what that means is it's just the job isn't brought to fruition. It's incomplete. There's no closure there. And what I have started to do is, instead of, for example, right now, going in, getting another cup of coffee or eating lunch or whatever, I will probably immediately clean this up, complete this task at hand, so I don't have an incomplete upload or download or whatever the analogy was. So I will, however, get my loppers and tackle the rest of that after I get rid of all of this debris. So I hope that was a little bit helpful for you guys in what type of plant this is and ways you can tame the jungle that can become your garden after a heavy rain.